Hi guys, welcome back to Scalemotor, and today we're carrying on with the Tamiya CBR1000RR-R. I'm not going to show me cutting everything off the sprue and sanding it up, we've seen that a million times, so we're just going to jump straight in with a priming. I've used the UMP white with a touch of black just to get a grey colour. And the reason I'm doing this is because the fairings are going to have a white base coat, and the same reason I use white when I'm doing a black base, I wanted a slightly different colour just so I could see the white paint going down. So we're just going to apply it as we normally would, with a light dusty coat to start and then build it up through the layers till we've got about 3 or 4 coats, and we're just trying to make sure we get into every little recess and corner because there are quite a few on parts like this. So next up we're just going to come in with the Tamiya XF1 flat black. We've thinned this about 50-50 with the Tamiya lacquer thinner, and all we're really going to be doing with this is just covering the back of the fairings. And rather than building it up layer by layer, because the flat black does dry pretty quick, what we're just going to do is keep going over the part until we've got the desired kind of colour. This is not really imperative, you don't have to do this step. I like to do this step because you do see most real life motorbike fairings will be a kind of black colour on the inside. You'll normally see a lot of overspray, which is why when it comes to painting the outside of the fairings, we're not going to bother masking the back up. So now we're done with the back of the fairings, we're going to start on the front, and we're starting with the LP2 from Tamiya. It's a lovely glossy white paint, and I've thinned it with the Tamiya lacquer thinner with retarder. I've gone about 70-30, so 70% thinner, 30% paint. I did start off a 50-50, and then I slowly built up the thinner until it got to that nice milky consistency, which is perfect for the airbrush. And then we're just going to build it up slowly, doing a nice thin coat to start off with, and then slowly build it up with each layer. We don't want to coat the part, we don't want to hose it on, we don't want it to pool on the fairings because any runs and stuff will show through. The fairings are going to be kind of the main focal point of the bike when it's finished, so we want these looking as smooth and as glossy as we possibly can. So for the decals and the masking, I made myself this little sheet with tracing paper. All I really done was, first off, I traced the shape of the fairings for the Fireblade from the decal call out that came with the kit, and then I got the decal call out from the RC213V, this, and I just popped the tracing paper on top of the of each part of the bike and just kind of traced out exactly where I was going to put each decal. And I also got down the fairings from the RC213V that I built, just as a kind of reference, so they are going to sit on the desk next to me while I do the masking. So here I'm just using the 10mm Tamiya masking tape, and I found out it's pretty much exactly the same size we need for that white strip going up the middle. This is always going to be masked for whichever colour we're painting, because it's just going to stay the base coat colour. So I had to just pop it on and just get the angle right, and you can see me kind of offering it up and holding it to the old fairings. I say the old fairings, the fairings from the RC213V, just to get the angle right. I was popping it on the Fireblade, popping the fairings actually on where they would go, just to see if it looked right to my eye. Once I was happy with it, I just stuck it down. And then the difference with this bike compared to the RC213V is it's got that fin for the aero on the side of the fairing. So once this bit was where I needed it to be, I had to pop the fin on and then just line up the 10mm tape, which you'll probably see me doing here. Now I got quite lucky with where I glued on the cocktail sticks for painting on the fins, because they fit right through a gap in the fairing. So now I'm just masking up that fin for the aero on the side, and I've just got the 10mm tape, detacked it on the back of my hand, and I'm just popped the fin on to the fairing exactly where it would go, and I'm just lining the edges of the 10mm tape up with the 10mm tape underneath, just to make sure when you look at the fairing side on, it doesn't look staggered and the lines flow through each part. And now once we've done that side, we've just moved on to the next, and what we're doing here is we're going to be masking the tank. Now the tank was pretty easy. There's just one piece which has a demarcation on it for the tank, and then there's two side pieces which attach to the tank. So all I've done is I've popped these side pieces on the bike where they would go and put a strip of masking tape over the both of them. Once I'm sure that that's in the right position and I've got that where I need it to be, I'm going to flip it over, do the other side, and make sure the two pieces line up. And once we've lined them both up, we're just going to come in with the craft knife, and we're just going to run along that seam line very carefully, trying not to scratch the white paint we've already put down. You can see I'm using my ring finger just to brace my hand to keep it steady, just so I can make sure that the knife doesn't slip out of that groove and I have to sand and repaint. But once that's done, that's all. We've got a nice cut along that line. We'll be able to take that side piece off, continue masking, and then once we're all masked up and we're all painted, we'll take the masking tape off and it should line up perfectly when put back on the bike. Next up, we're masking up the tail. Now the tail has a strip going through the middle, which is what you can see that there. I believe that's a 6mm piece of tape. I did measure from the other fairings, and I used the actual decal to measure the exact size we needed, and luckily I had tape the right size. Now that was simple, just pop that across the back where I think it should go, and then the white tape I'm using is the Tamiya masking tape for curves. I believe it's the 2mm, and this is just to get the curve of the Repsol logo that's on the tail of this bike. It was a bit tricky just because this part I'm masking on now is not flat, it's not smooth, but once we've got that on, we're just going to run along the seat cover Again, as we did with the tank with the craft knife, just so we've got a nice clean cut so we can take things apart and paint them, and when they're back together they line up perfectly. I didn't show the masking on the nose cone because that was super simple. I just used the 6mm tape and just run it straight across the middle of the nose cone, just under the bottom of the screen. That's it, that's all masked up. So now once we've got the borders of our colours all masked out, we've masked off any bits that are going to stay white, we're going to come in with a thicker masking tape and just mask everything else off that's not going to be orange, because the orange is the colour we're going to be painting first. So now we're all masked, it's time to paint. Rather than use any pre-mixed colour matched colours from the likes of maybe Zero Paint or Splash or Gravity, I decided to have a go of mixing my own colours, just because I had the stuff here, and with various things going on in the world at the moment, I wasn't sure what shipping was going to be like. So I started off using the Mr. Colour 171, which is fluorescent red, and then I thought I'm going to add some Tamiya LP8. However, I didn't have LP8, I just had the X8, lemon yellow I believe. I didn't know if the acrylic was going to mix with the lacquer based Mr. Hobby, but I thought I'd give it a go. So I went 50-50 with the paints and then just kept adjusting, adding little bits of yellow until it was more of a fluorescent orange colour. I then thinned it with the Tamiya lacquer thinner with retarder, and then I tested it out first, and it did spray really well, just like a lacquer. So I now know for future reference that at least this combination of Mr. Hobby lacquer and Tamiya acrylic does mix and spray quite well. And then it was a case of just doing what we usually do, building it up slowly. First coat, nice dusty coat. I like to, when I get to the masked area, spray away from the masking tape, so essentially the paint isn't hitting the edge of the masking tape, and then I just build it up slowly around the masked area, just to make sure it doesn't seep under or get too wet. And I've done the same on each part. I just slowly built up the orange until I got to a colour which I thought looked most like the actual fairings on the RC213V. I think I ended up with 3 to 4 coats, and then once that's been left for a couple of minutes, I don't tend to leave it fully dry before I start taking the masking tape off. So once it's been left for a minute or two, I'll then come in and remove the masking tape, and this is my favourite part of any masking job. There were 1 or 2 places on the fairings where the paint was a little feathery around the demarcation. However, it's not too much of an issue, and it's barely noticeable. So that's the orange done, and I'm quite happy with how that colour turned out. And now the orange is done, we've got the next part, which is even more masking, and we're going to mask up for the red. So the red on the side fairings, the bottom is a curve, and the RC213V kit comes with a nice mask sheet, so you can fit this curve perfectly around the gaps on the fairings and whatnot. However, this couldn't be used on this kit because obviously the fairings are different, and that little mask sticker which I've just cut around did have a bit of a lip in it where it would sit into a recess in the fairing, and that recess isn't on the fairings for the Fireblade. So I've cut the lip off and just kind of traced the curve just to get the angle the same, and then I'm just gonna peel that up and just get the top fairing and the bottom fairing, stick them together with a little bit of masking tape, and then we can line up the curve to get that to sit exactly where we need it to go. So now we've got all that masking done, it's time to actually mix up the red. So again, we started with the Mr. Hobby 171 fluorescent red. Some people do use this and just as it is, and I have used it just as it is. I've used it on a McLaren MP44. I was going to use it for the Repsol fairings on the RC213V, but I bought the Repsol set and I was going to use it on this one. However, looking at more and more photos, the fluorescent aspect of the red on the Repsol bike, it doesn't really seem to be there that much, at least on the newer bikes. It seems a lot like a more deeper red. So what I've done is I've got the Tamiya LP50 bright red, and I've just added a few drops of this first to start off, mix that up, give it a little spray, and it still looks a little kind of too fluorescent, a little too pinky, so I do later on add a little bit more red just to get that colour I'm looking for. So again, this was thinned with Tamiya lacquer thinner with retarder, and it was thinned about 70-30. Like previously with the white, 70% thinner, about 30% paint. I started off 50-50 and just kept adding thinner until I got the consistency I was looking for. And then again, we've slowly going to build up the coats. We're going to start off with a nice light coat, spraying away from the edge of the masking tape. And then later on, once we've got these first couple of coats down, we're going to spray towards the masking tape just to make sure we get all of the area which isn't masked. So you may notice that the paint is looking a little bit too fluorescent and a little pinky going down. So what I decided to do after about 2 coats, I decided to add just a little bit more of that LP50 bright red, just to give it a kind of deeper red colour. And I think I did end up with a colour I am very happy with. And once we were all painted, it was the fun part of unmasking. Again, I left it for about 2 minutes after I finished painting, just while I cleaned out the airbrush, and then come straight in to unmask. Being careful while the paint is still wet. If you've gone a little thick, you can start pulling the edge of the paint up when you're unmasking and making sure just to touch any only orange or white parts which were painted previously, and I know they're dry. And next up we have yet more masking. So now we're just masking up the black strip at the bottom of the side fairings. The RC213V, this is done with the carbon decal which comes with the kit, and it's got sponsor logos on. So all I've done here is I've just measured the size of the decal and just measured the bit which I've left unmasked, which is going to be painted black, just to make sure they're the same size. I will try and use this decal over the top just because it has the sponsor logos on. However, I'm painting as a backup really, just so I can get the black down there even if the decaling fails. It's super simple, just get any size piece of masking tape really and put it across exactly where you need it, making sure to press it down into any dips and recesses. This side fairing which I've got in my hand now was a little bit harder because it has a recess for the side stand, which obviously the RC213V GP bike won't have. So all I've done is I've got the 2mm masking tape, I believe, put it across, got it exactly where I need it, and then I'm just going to pop some masking tape over the top to make sure I don't get any of that black where I don't want it. So the line of that masking tape which goes over the top of the recess, I decided is going to go into the recess and come back out the other side, just so when you're looking at it side on, it looks like it's all one black strip rather than a black strip with a dent coming out of the top. So then it came to painting. We're going to be using the Tamiya X18 semi-gloss black, thinned with the lacquer thinner with the retarder. And again, this is somewhere in between 50-50 and 70-30, 70% being the thinner, 30 being the paint. We're just going to build it up slowly as we have been with the previous layers, and spraying away from the masking tape, just so we don't get any kind of paint bleed under the masking tape. We had a lot of other kind of little fairing bits to paint, and these were done in semi-gloss black as well. These are just the insides to hold the side fairings on, and we also had the oil cooler guard for the bottom. We also painted up the rear view mirrors, the wing mirrors, and the license plate holder. And then again, the best part, which is peeling the masking tape off. Again, this has left about 2 minutes just while I cleaned out the airbrush. And then we're just going to carefully peel off the paint. If we're using the tweezers, we really want to be careful and try not to scratch any of the paint, even if it has been dry for a while, because that can be a bit of a nightmare having to remask, repaint. Quite a bit of masking tape. I always use probably more than necessary, just because I don't think you can ever have too much. As long as kind of you're covering what needs to be covered, then I wouldn't worry about just how much you use. And the black came out lovely, no bleeds or anything. And once the fairings are popped together, you can see that it lines up lovely on the bottom. And now was again more masking. So this is what we talked about earlier, the wings on the side. I couldn't use the decals, so I had to mask them off, which meant mapping them out. And all I really done was popped the tank and the tail fairings all on where they needed to go. I used a little bit of white glue just to get things to stay where they needed to stay. I used white glue because once I need to take the fairings off, I can just pull them off and the glue doesn't hold it that great. So all I've done is I've got some thin masking tape and mapped out the lines. And what I'm doing on the tail here is I'm just making kind of the end of a wing kind of shape, just cutting that out of the masking tape. Then I'm going to peel that off and stick it on the tail fairing where the end of the wing would go. Done this the same on both sides, and then again I've just come in with the craft knife and very carefully cut along all the seam lines, peeled everything off and just masked the rest of the gaps. So as you can see looking at the decal sheet, the wings aren't exactly black, and I found a good colour to replicate this is the Tamiya LP65 Rubber Black. It's a brilliant paint. I use it for loads of things, from wires to bleed nipples to fork seals to electrical connectors, but I found it matches very closely to the colour of these wings on the decals. I thinned it straight in with about 70% rather than 50% and building it up, just because I didn't have much of the paint and I know it will still spray nice at 70% ratio. So we're just going to build it up with a nice dusty coat to start, spraying away from the masking tape as we have been, just to make sure we don't flood the edge of the masking tape and get any bleed through. I was also just making sure that the curved areas were stuck down nicely, because they can kind of lift and bunch together, and that will leave you with spikes all along your demarcation once you take the tape off, which is obviously something we want to avoid when we've got a nice sweeping curve. In hindsight, I probably should have used the curved Tamiya masking tape. However, at the time, the thin 1mm I believe I used was what I had on hand. And now that that paint is down, we're just going to peel off the masking tape and just stick a couple of bits on, just to check to make sure everything lines up nice. I probably could have put a little bit more thought into the placement of these the wings, or these swooshes, just because when you look at the bike from a side-on angle, there's a part of the under tray which you can see through the kind of tail frame, and this does look a little like it's meant to be part of the design. It's not, however, it can look from certain angles as if it is part of the design. It doesn't look bad, and I am quite happy with the result. However, if I was to build another like this, I'd probably look at spacing the kind of wings and the swooshes closer together, just so we could maybe add just the tip of a wing in line with that bit of the under tray we can see, just to give the effect of another swoosh. bit of hue we have the majority of the side bits on. Here's a nice picture of the fairings before I painted the wings. I thoroughly enjoyed painting these fairings, even though there was a lot of masking. That meant there was a lot of add masking. If you've also enjoyed, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. But in the meantime, have a great day and stay safe.